Earlier this year, the high rents at one of Taipei's newest social housing projects raised eyebrows and captured much media attention. Yet, even with the sky-high prices, applications for a unit still flooded in, making it extremely difficult to get one. This anomaly came about because of Taiwan's unusual social housing policies. Unlike many countries in the world, Taiwan allows up to 70% of a social housing project to be rented out to non-disadvantaged groups. Why is this allowed, and what problems does it present for the fight against homelessness? Our Sunday Special Report investigates.
Mr. Tsai has taken the day off work to come to Taipei's Datong district office. He's here to see if he's gotten lucky in the social housing lottery.
他抽的是一般户一房型，一般户一房型。好，请王律师帮我按下启动按钮。
As a Taipei resident, Mr. Tsai was able to apply for a studio at the Minglun Social Housing project. He was up against 1,157 other applicants, meaning the odds of winning were less than 5%. In the end, luck wasn't on his side.
有抽中吗？
没有，顺位到900多位了。
He wasn't the only one disappointed by the outcome of the raffle.
都没抽到，很难抽的，很奇怪了。
你是抽哪一个？
在地区里一房型的，
所以你有抽到吗？
没有，没有。
The Minglun Social Housing project is located on Section 3 of Chenda Road in Taipei, near the Yuanshan MRT station and the Taipei Expo Park. Completed in November of 2020, the complex is 380 units up for rent. Just 35% of them are reserved for low-income households, people with disabilities, and other disadvantaged groups. The remaining 65% can be rented out to people in one of 3 categories: Taipei residents, neighborhood residents, and students and workers in Taipei whose household registration is elsewhere. In total, about 3,600 applications were filed for units at the Minglun Social Housing project, meaning the odds of scoring a unit were just 1 in 10. Even so, those odds were good, compared with a raffle in 2019 for a public housing project near Xingtian Temple MRT station. The chance of getting a unit there was just 1.7 out of 100.
当然，这个也是跟行天宫它的数量比较少。
Of course, that was also because there were fewer units at the Xingtian Temple project and because it's better located. But generally speaking, there aren't enough social housing units in Taipei to meet demand.
You may have heard talk about public housing, youth housing, or affordable housing. All these words actually refer to different kinds of social housing.
狭义的社会住宅就是我们现在谈的。
A narrow definition of social housing would be what we're discussing now. Housing that is only for rent and not for sale. But more than that, it's housing that's let out to people at affordable prices.
The concept of social housing can be traced back to late 19th century Europe. Rapid urbanization resulted in a shortage of housing that left many middle and low-income households unable to afford a home, feeding social tension. After many years of calls for reform, governments started stepping into the markets to address the housing shortfall. These first social housing projects were all rental units with no option to purchase them. Over in Taiwan, early social housing policies focused on building houses to sell. But this mode of government housing left out many disadvantaged households. It wasn't until 2010 that Taiwan truly embraced the concept of social housing for rent.
2011年的时候，住宅法的第1版通过。
In 2011, the first version of the Housing Act was passed. That was the moment social housing began to be enshrined in our laws.
Social housing had a late start in Taiwan, and unlike in other countries, its main target demographic at the beginning was not disadvantaged groups. Today, Taiwanese law requires a minimum of 30% of social housing units to be reserved for disadvantaged households. In most localities, the maximum 70% of remaining units is let out to non-disadvantaged households. The only income restriction for this latter group is that their annual income must be below the locality's median.
国外他们可能会去要求到一个
Abroad, they might have more stringent criteria because when housing projects are built, their main goal is to help those who most need it. So Taiwan's rules, which allow anyone below the 50th percentile mark to move in, are extremely unusual. In Japan's housing projects, residents must have an annual income below the 25th percentile.
Why are the rules in Taiwan so lax? Experts say the main factors at play are Taiwan's exorbitant housing prices and the so-called black market for rentals.
因为很多人他租不起房，
Many people can't afford to rent a place or buy their own home. They might struggle to regularly make rent on the private market, but they don't have an income low enough to be considered a medium or low-income household. So their only option is social housing.
People who fall in this category are often called the sandwich generation. It's this group that the lax criteria is supposed to benefit. But these loose policies have created another problem. The more people eligible for social housing, the lower the chance of actually winning a unit. This is Mika, who works as a secretary at a social welfare foundation. She's applied for social housing 4 times and came up empty-handed all 4 times.
我大概从前年开始，
I started applying 2 years ago for the project in Wanhua. Then I registered for the ones in Shanchong and in Nangang, and most recently for the Minglun Social Housing project. I didn't get any of them. It's so hard to get one. I think you might have a better chance at winning the lotto.
The government says it wants to help both disadvantaged groups and young middle-income households. But the problem is that there simply aren't enough social housing units. Nationwide, only 17,000 units have been built so far, comprising just 0.19% of the housing stock.
像日本的社会住宅，他们占全国大概6%。
In Japan, social housing makes up for 6% of the housing stock. In the Netherlands, 30% of all residences are social housing. In Amsterdam, the proportion is as high as 45 or 46%. Almost half of the city is social housing.
To cope with the shortage of social housing, an expert suggests limiting eligibility for units.
盖了这个社会住宅就是要帮助那些真的社会弱势的。
The point of building social housing is to help those who really need it. Single-parent households and people with disabilities should be the #1 priority. We're building so little, and after so much ado, that units end up being allocated to people who can afford to rent on the private market. That is not fair.
The expert says disadvantaged groups should be the priority. He says that building units for the sandwich generation can wait until there are more units available and until the social housing system is well established. But the government is reluctant to tighten criteria, saying there's a reason for allowing a wide range of applicants.
法律规定30%保障给弱势。
The law says at least 30% must be reserved for disadvantaged groups, but the proportion we're actually reserving for them is more like 40%. We wouldn't want for there to be a law that requires a very high ratio. That could trigger another round of protests. People might say, oof, they're building a housing project near your house and it's all for disadvantaged people. What's stipulated in the law is quite reasonable because in practice we're giving a chance for more people to move in.
The government says that a mixed model for social housing prevents the projects from becoming stigmatized by the public. But in order for social housing to fulfill their purpose, more units need to be built. So far, Taipei has built the most social housing of any city or county. Ahead of the 2014 local elections, Taipei Mayor Ke Wen-je said his administration would build 50,000 units to make up 5% of the city's housing stock. It's a policy he's pushed to implement while in office. But during a city council session in January 2021, in Ke's second term, the mayor said the target of 50,000 units was unlikely to be reached.
We were very naive to think we'd be able to build 50,000 units in 8 years. When we got down to it, we realized it's really not that easy. You can't just draw a budget and wait for the houses to materialize.
The mayor said Taipei would get 20,000 new units at most during his tenure. In 2016, President Tsai also made an ambitious commitment to build 200,000 social housing units in 8 years. The first phase of the project aimed to create 40,000 units by 2020. According to the Construction and Planning Agency, the first phase of the project has been launched, but 20,000 of the units are still under construction.